Age of Empires 4 is a return to the classic city-building, Middle Ages style, real-time strategy game genre that many of us have known and love for decades now. In fact, it is the most recent modern addition to the series and the newest addition in 15 years. That's right, in the last 15 years we've seen Age of Empires grow and develop, but largely through definitive editions, through remasters, a couple of additional DLCs here and there, but Age of Empires 4 returns the series to its former glory at a glorious AAA price tag. My name is JumboPixel, and this is my review of Age of Empires 4 here on release day, the 28th of October 2021. If you enjoy this video, please do leave a like rating for more Age of Empires content. And now I'll stop asking and let's jump straight into the review. And for starters, I think it makes sense that we talk a little bit about gameplay first of all. And as you can tell, Age of Empires 4 slaps a slightly more beautiful, indeed 4K resolution skin on top of a tried and true Age of Empires style gameplay. This is the classic format, and you will slide straight back into classic Age of Empires combat. Indeed, that paper, scissors, rock style element of designing units, right? You have your cavalry, your anti-cavalry, and your ranged. You have all of the familiar unit types, and actually, I must say, not as many units as I thought a definitive AAA title would launch with, but maybe that's just me. Either way, the unit roster is varied enough across the various ages that you play in through Age of Empires, from the Dark Ages right through to Gunpowder, and the unit roster, while a little bit limited, is fairly engaging and behaves as you would expect. However, I should say that the AI and unit pathing in my experience has left me also feeling like I wanted a little bit more, and those familiar with the Age of Empires format will know that you can't just send your units off into a forest because they might just run at a tree for a few hours, and indeed they will. So keep an eye on them, they work well, they're reasonably well varied, but the AI unit pathing is not quite up to scratch from what we might expect from a 2021 release. However, that's not all. Of course, a big part of the normal Age of Empires experience is indeed that fort and city building mechanic, the type of thing that you can see here, right? Jump out into the map, claim the land and the sacred sites, the resources that you like, build a town around them, maybe construct some walls, send some villagers out to mine some stone or gold, and over time build up your technology, build up your army, and build up indeed your civilization, right? Your town and your forts and your fortifications and so on, and eventually hopefully construct monuments to win the game or crush your opponents. And that tried and true real-time format, right, need I remind you, Age of Empires of course does not stick within the turn limits of, say, humankind and civilization, but instead it is playing out in real time, and those who like that format will absolutely feel right at home with Age of Empires 4. The game gives us 8 playable factions, from the tried and true Romans and the French through to some more nuanced and indeed slightly different factions that historians among us will know and love, but they are slightly different in that they mess with the traditional Age of Empires format. I am of course talking about factions like the Rus and indeed the Mongols. In fact, I'm not alone in citing that the Mongols are probably one of the more interesting factions in Age of Empires 4. They make up 1 of 8, and they're certainly a little bit more different and varied in that they do what Mongols do best. Unlike the normal factions in Age of Empires 4 that are largely built around building up a fort, getting your resources, building up an army and fighting your foes, the Mongols of course are much more mobile, with relocatable buildings, movement speed buffs through their unique units, and they have a slightly more difficult time therefore in building walls and fortifications and in mining stone. You can see here that they have to indeed mine it in a much more passive way. So there are upsides and downsides, and that's one thing that I really like about playing as the Mongols, and perhaps something that I don't like quite so much about playing as one of the more routine factions like the Romans, English, say, the French. There's less variety between them that I would have liked, although it is worth noting that each faction possesses, of course, its own unique buildings to build, technologies to research, and crucially, units to conquer with, and they do a pretty good job at doing that. A strip back outside of Age of Empires, more sort of sandboxy modes, and of course the game presents some historical campaigns, indeed 40 plus missions across its historical campaigns. And these were something that were talked about a lot in the build-up to the release of Age of Empires. The developers were talking about them a lot, these sort of examples to tell real-world histories, as they called it. And I think that the campaigns do a fairly good job at that. They combine the good side of Age of Empires, the fun battles, the setting up these ginormous events, and indeed building and constructing empires and civilizations within a broader format. That format, of course, is a little bit restricted. You're playing within the constraints of history, but it really does let you take it away and take it into your own hands. It's a nice balance between having flexible and fun gameplay to learn the game as well, but also not be completely inundated in an unknown sandbox world. And players who normally like the historical campaigns in these kind of games, including others like, say, the Total War franchise, will feel right at home with the historical campaigns in Age of Empires 4 as well. Moving on to some of the upsides, downsides, and turbulations with the game. Of course, it is a 2021 release, yet you could be forgiven for thinking it perhaps isn't. While the graphics are fairly clean and fairly nice looking, they really aren't quite the leaps and bounds above, say, the definitive edition of Age of Empires 2, which is many years old now and arguably looks exactly the same. You could argue, of course, I'm not coming to play Age of Empires for its graphics, and I dare say you won't be disappointed in that mindset because these are nothing to write home about. But just because those are nothing to write home about doesn't mean there aren't other good things with Age of Empires 4. I think from what I've been able to test, which is quite limited at this point, this is after all a release review, the multiplayer systems seem to be functioning very well. We've seen this in the gameplay that you're watching on screen, we've seen it from the developers, and in the little bit of testing that I've been able to do, it seems to be working pretty well, actually. So hopefully we can get some good multiplayer games out of Age of Empires 4. It does, of course, lend itself quite nicely to that, given that games tend to be much shorter, and real-time strategy games tend to play into that as well. Unfortunately, Age of Empires 4 is not launching with a map editor or modding tools. We are told that they are on the way, but the game isn't launching with them, and that is quite disappointing, I have to say. Overall, what's my verdict on this Age of Empires 4 as we pan out and finish this review with a wonderful trailer provided by the Age of Empires crew themselves? I have to say that Age of Empires 4 is a good Age of Empires experience. If you're familiar with real-time strategy games with the Age of Empires franchise or similar, you'll feel right at home with it. Its launch price tag is difficult to stomach, and there are definitely some issues here, including the fact that it's not launching with broad, sweeping community support with modding tools. The initial roster of empires, while they are somewhat detailed and nuanced, is a little bit restricted. I would have expected a bit more from it. Overall, it's an enjoyable city-building Middle Ages RTS experience, and one that I can recommend to most players, particularly as Age of Empires 4, the full definitive version, has launched on Xbox Gamepass for PC, so anybody can get their hands on it.